In an effort to address prison overcrowding, the state will give the Colorado Department of Corrections $10.6 million to lease a private prison. Meanwhile, Alan Prendergast with Westward reported that CDOC is now recalculating parole times for over 3,000 inmates after the Colorado Supreme Court ruled that the department misinterpreted sentencing statutes. Patty, let's get right to you about Alan's great report and some pretty astounding headlines. 3,000 inmates, that's a lot.
It is. Well, so on Wednesday, the state decided not to revamp an old closed prison, which was smart because it was a solitary prison. You couldn't revamp it for any amount of money, but instead to put $10 million into a private prison that could house 250 prisoners because Colorado has so many more prisoners than it thought. Well, if you read Alan's story, which broke yesterday, and Alan, I think, is the preeminent prison reporter in the country, not just in this state. It's his specialty. He found that up to 3,000 prisoners currently in Colorado prisons, they should be up for parole. Their time has been miscalculated. It's going to become a huge legal case. And the fact is, if these people had been let out on the streets or into programs when they should have been, we wouldn't have a prison overcrowding project that is going to cost taxpayers $10 million. Prisoners are not the most sympathetic people to write about, but when their rights are being violated, and taxpayers have to pay $10 million because the state isn't following its own rules, that's an issue we should pay attention to.
David, this sounds like a big legal deal, and I realize it's a breaking story from yesterday, so we haven't gone into all the different aspects of it. But when you hear something like the Colorado Supreme Court saying that you've misinterpreted sentencing statutes, that headline, should that give us pretty good pause?
Well, it's an important decision, of course. I've looked at the sentencing statute. I haven't studied this particular issue, but they are quite complicated. So it's understandable that there could be two good faith interpretations of these things. This was not an obvious error that somebody made. It was more like the Internal Revenue Corporate Tax Code, where there's multiple possible interpretations, and the Colorado Supreme Court did its job and now definitively settled on a particular one. Alan Prendergast has been with Westward since the 20th century and continues to be, I think, the premier long-form investigative reporter in the state, not just on prisons, but on so many other topics. So you folks who think Westward is just for the strip club ads and the movie reviews
and the pot ads.
And the pot ads. Let's first things first. Some issues have some really great reporting, and that includes any issue that has an article by him. Senator Kevin Lundberg, at the hearing for this $10 million private prison thing, talked about part of the problem is all of the correctional system is all in silos that don't really communicate well with each other, like community corrections, parole, the prisons, all that. And he said it's long past time for some executive leadership to improve the coordination, because he said the way we're doing it now is not only wasting dollars, it's wasting people. Yeah.
Ben, there's a lot of headlines here, but I guess one of the things that pops out with private prisons to me is that I get Hollywood as Hollywood, so I don't take it as fact, but there have been a lot of stories lately in dramas like Orange is the New Black that do not paint a pretty picture for a private prison system. So you see Colorado investing in a private prison. What do folks need to know about, hey, is this a good idea, or wait a second, there should be someone should be pressing the brakes about this one?
Well, you know, there's no question that we are at capacity and over capacity and need some solutions. You know, my personal sentiment is that I don't think private prisons are the right answer. I think we need to look more holistically at how we decide to sentence people, how we decide to judge people, and even the things that we're sending them to prison for. We have an incredibly high rate of nonviolent offenders who are incarcerated in this country, and that contributes to the overpopulation of prison systems. And I think there's a lot better way to deal with nonviolent criminals than to basically put them in criminal college. So, you know, it's interesting to me to watch the sort of political football here and hearing Lundberg talking about executive leadership. Well, he doesn't have to look very far, just in the mirror every morning.
Roger, in addition to being a former PIO for the Attorney General,
Sure.
You're also a former PIO for the Department of Corrections.
Right.
Back when its esteemed leader, Tom Clements, was around. I don't know if this is a sign of it. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I guess it begs the question for me, has the Department of Corrections ever really recovered from the loss of Tom Clements?
Yeah, that's an absolutely great question, because I don't think they have. And I don't think there was ever a doubt that they would be in mourning for quite some time. When you walk through that building, and as I was the next door office, and people were still talking about him and almost enshrining stuff inside the building. He was a data guy. He was very much loved by the people who worked with him. So no, I don't think they have recovered yet. And I think that's maybe why we're not seeing some of the leadership you're talking about. I think the prison system has kind of had a hands-off approach to some extent. The DOC coming in for a supplemental is not new. That happens almost every single year. This is a large amount. But I think to understand it, you have to understand the history. The reason private prisons came into effect was not something that was desired. It was when the Colorado economy was so poor that we couldn't build another prison. So what we did was we fielded it out at a minimum rate. And I've been in them. They're not near as nice as ours. They're very, very mechanical. It's like going to a steakhouse versus going to a fast food restaurant. It's very, very, just very corporate. CSP was then built when we had a little bit of money, CSP2, excuse me, which is also in Canyon City, which is this huge
What's
prison.
CSP2? See,
CSP1,
you know the inside
I'm
stuff.
sorry.
Yeah, that's okay, that's okay.
Colorado State Penitentiary Prison,
Okay.
1, that's where our death chamber is, so that's the big one, so Supermax. Right next to it is CSP2, which was built for this overcrowding so we could take our prisoners back. Once we got it built, an attorney sued, I'm not going to say the name, but you probably can guess, sued on the behalf of the prisoners because, and they talk about it now, that you couldn't see sunlight. So if a prisoner is in solitary and can't see the sky, then you have to, that's unconstitutional. It's illegal to do that. So CSP2, because it was like a high security prison, there was no place for that. There was no place for prisoners to be let out to go out. Matter of fact, when you go into the prisons, there's like a window that's like this big. It's just like this. So there was no place for an outside recreation. So they had to individually take people down each one time, and these are violent criminals. So it was very dangerous for staff. So that's why they were looking for the supplemental, was to build that prison out.